Hey everybody, Moms Against Medical Bullying. I just wanted to take you along with me for a few minutes and read a couple of pages to you from a book that I am reading. I just want to say that I'm not personally a scientist. I never conducted any of these experiments. But, here we are, okay, in a world right now taken over by a specific dogma. And I feel that, it's out of necessity, that many people, like such as myself, are looking into these matters because it's not because we want to pretend and act like we're scientists, but it's almost because it's in a sense like we have to defend ourselves from this insanity. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. So earlier I was reading the second part of this book, which is called Pasteur, Plagiarist, Imposter. And, it was okay, but I'm really enjoying the first section, which is Bechamp or Pasteur, a lost chapter in the history of biology by F.O. Douglas Hume. I feel like her writing is really palatable. So here we go. So, okay, this is chapter 10 called Laboratory Experiments. As we have already seen, oh, and by the way, I would listen to myself on 1.5 speed because I love listening to people on 1.5. It just makes everything better. Okay, here we go. As we have already seen, at the time when Bechamp and Pasteur turned their attention to the subject of fermentation, only the vaguest conceptions were held in regard to living matter. Grand names were given, such as protoplasm and blasteme, but so little was known that the albuminoids were believed to be always identical. Virchow had tried to simplify matters by declaring that the living units of animal and vegetable forms are the cells of the body, and while Henle advanced considerably further by stating that, on the contrary, the cells are themselves built up by minute atoms, the molecular granulations, just distinguishable within them. I had a thought too. I'm pausing right there. Like, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like this bubbled up from my spirit. And I just felt like saying everything is either, molecules or microbes. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just kind of a sense that I have. Okay, continuing. Schwann had also taught the atmosphere is filled with infinitesimal living organisms. Then Bechamp and Pasteur appeared on the scene, the latter first of all affirming the spontaneous origin of ferments, while at the same time Bechamp irrefutably demonstrated that yeast and other organisms are airborne. Finally, Pasteur, converted by Bechamp's illuminating views, became enthusiastic about atmospheric germs, and as we have seen before, a fashionable assembly of the elite, claimed for himself all of the credit for their elucidation. Yet so little was he really enlightened that we find him soon afterwards denying the parasitic origin of a complaint pebrine, which was for the diseases of the silkworms, which was generally provoked by a parasite, while in the opposite direction his conception of living matter was no more advanced than the old-fashioned view that held the living body to be nothing more than a kind of chemical apparatus. For him, the body contained nothing actually alive. Its wonderful workings never suggested to Pasteur that living autonomous agents. Of course, to be fair, it may be said that there was no reason why Pasteur should have understood the body. He never received any medical, physiological, or biological training and had no pretensions to be a naturalist. Chemist though he was, he seems to have had no aptitude for the branch of science to which he turned his attention. When he took his degree of Bachelor of Science, his examiner appended a note to his diploma stating that he was only mediocre in chemistry. He does not seem to even have been particularly quick in grasping the ideas of other people, for we have seen what a long time it took before he realized the correctness of Bechamp's explanation of pibrine. It was in worldly wisdom that his mind was acute. Fortune favored him, and he was always on the alert to seize opportunities. But sad to say, it seems that he was not above pushing himself. Excuse me. That's the only thing bad about using screen recorder. He was not above pushing himself at someone else's expense, even though the progress of science might be thereby hampered, and we can only deplore this misuse of his admirable persistence and energy. While Pasteur learned nothing more about life than the fact that there are living organisms in the air, Professor Bechamp continued his untiring experiments. Fate was kind in bringing to his help Professor Esther, another worker fully qualified by training and experience. The two scientists were hardworking men with their minds well exercised by their daily toil, and their discoveries were consistently founded in their clinical observations. Bechamp made discoveries in the same way that a Beethoven composes, a Raphael paints, a Dickens writes, that is to say, because he could not help himself. He could not do otherwise. In pathetic contrast, we find men today taken away from practical work and set down in laboratories to make discoveries. In many cases, they have mediocre minds which could never originate any idea of any sort. All they can follow are routine theories, and their so-called discoveries are of the type that pile up error upon error. Provide a man with his practical work, and if he has a discoverer's rare insight, as night yields today, so will practice lead to enlightenment. What is urgently needed is freedom from dogma and the encouragement of original opinions. Minds in mass move at a snail's pace, and the greatest impediment, no doubt, to Bechamp's microzymian doctrine was the fact that it so utterly outstripped the scientific conceptions of that period. What he did first and foremost was to lay the foundation of what was then a new science, that of cytology. Having made his surprising discovery of the minute organisms, agents of fermentation, in chalk, Bechamp's next work was an investigation of the molecular granulations of cells with which he connected the little bodies of chalk and limestone. So he said these little bodies were the same. Up to this date, Henley's vague views regarding the granulations had been ignored, and they were widely considered to be mere... Sorry, I'm trying to make this more clear. It's blurry. They were considered to be mere formless, meaningless particles. Calling the microscope and polarimeter to his aid and undertaking innumerable chemical experiments, Professor Bechamp, making use at first principally of such organizations as yeast, found the granulations which they contain to be agents provocative of fermentation. So he's saying there's granulations, that yeast contains these granulations that cause fermentation, and then bestowed on them the explanatory name of microzyma. These same granulations he found in all animal and vegetable cells and tissues, and in all organic matter, even though apparently not organized, such as milk, in which he proved them to account for the chemical changes that result in the milk clotting. He found the microzymas teeming everywhere, innumerable in healthy tissues, and in diseased tissues he found them associated with various kinds of bacteria. One axiom he laid down was that though every microzyma is a molecular granulation, not every molecular granulation is a microzyma. Those that are microzymas he found to be powerful in inducing fermentation and to be possessed of some structure. In short, it was made clear to him that microzymas, not the cell, are the primary anatomical elements. It was never his practice to let his imagination outstrip his experiments. Invariably, he propounded his question and waited for facts to provide the answer. Working with Professor Esther, observations showed that not only are the molecular granulations of microzymas anatomical elements autonomously living with organization and life, inseparably united in their minute selves, but that it is due to these myriad lives that cells and tissues are constituted living. In fact, that all organisms, whether the one called the one-celled amoeba in its pristine simplicity, or a man in his very complexity, are associations of these minute living entities. A modern textbook sums up Bechamp's primary teaching, quote, "Their behavior, that of the molecular granulations here named microsomes, is in some cases such as to have led to the hypothesis long since suggested by Henle in 1841, and at a later period developed by Bechamp and Esther, and especially by Altman, that microsomes are actual units or bioblasts capable of assimilation, growth, and division, and hence to be regarded as elementary units of structure standing between the cell and the ultimate molecules of living matter. Only some such discovery could clear away the confusion on the subject of spontaneous generation. Superficial observers, among whom we are forced to include Pasteur, continue to maintain that fermentation was only induced by germs from the air, but at the same time Pasteur had to admit that meat, protected from atmospheric contact in an experiment of his own, nonetheless became tainted. Other experiments insisted upon changes taking place for which atmospheric organisms could not be held responsible. So from what I get from that is that there's these little bodies in the tissues of organs and things and in the air. Bechamp, the first, okay, let me see here. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to make a second video.